Okay.
All right,
If you
ladies
need
and
me to say
gentlemen.
anything at any time, just give me a shout.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again. I'm really excited for tonight's topic. Tonight, once again, we're going to be talking about alien abductions, UFOs, ETs, and someone who's made big progress in the UK towards that field. Really a trendsetter in that field. Canadian-born Joanna Summerscales grew up in the UK, trained in theater, television, production, and acting. She also graduated from Greenwich University with a HNC in television production technology. She has an adult teacher's qualification and trained as a regression therapist. Now, she started the ET Newsroom, formerly known as AMMAC, AMMACH, which stands for Anomalous Mind Management Abductee Contactee Helpline Project, which was founded by Joanne in 2011 with a view to provide a safe platform where experiencers could share their ET paranormal events, including abductions and contact, without fear or ridicule. She interviewed on camera and radio not only experiencers from around the world, but also scientists and other researchers, with a focus on the impact of the human being and the big question, what this means for the human race, amongst others. We're also going to be talking about the amazing contact experience case of Bill Brooks, who co-authored the book with her. The book is named 44, based on an ex-soldier's true story of lifelong encounters involving alien abduction, men in black, a serial killer, and a persecution by the Freemasons. So I hope everybody's ready to buckle in and get, because I think this is going to be exciting. So Joanne, thank you first for joining me. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, and thanks for persevering. We got there in the end, didn't we? So great to speak to you, Robert.
And thank you for all the pioneering work you've done in your country for this field. I mean, it's a small field, the UFO community, but I've found that everybody in the community is very nice, and you seem like a trendsetter as far as I'm concerned. How did you get involved or get interested in it?
Well, you know, it's a good question. And there was no epiphany or aha moment. It was really a roll on from all my other experiences of, you know, my pathway. And part of that has been interest in spiritual development, consciousness, you know, kind of development, where all that leads, where that all comes from. And then, of course, in the wider platform, well, not of course, but I began meeting people who had also had experiences such as I've become, you know, a person of great interest about recording those. And those were experiences of things ET paranormal, but also some incredible life-changing experiences like NDEs, near-death experiences, that kind of thing. And then also, I think that because my interest has been in the wellness aspect of humanity generally, and that took me in a pathway which for my own research, for myself, and for a family member that's disabled, I went into looking into regression, became qualified in that, and then I had a couple of clients who came to me some years ago now, and both gentlemen who'd had experiences of, one was of seeing when he would go to the bathroom at night to have a little toilet break, when he was washing his hands, he'd see his reflection in the mirror in front of him in the little bathroom cabinet, and he wouldn't see his own face. He would see something that he would describe that we would call a grey, that we'd now know as a grey. So that kind of frightened the bejesus out of him.
Oh, wow.
So he really wanted to explore that. And then the other gentleman, this is another interesting one, and neither of these guys really believed in this kind of thing as well, this field. So, you know, that's another interesting point. People have their consciousness kind of broken open and expanded in all kinds of different ways. And I think this ET element, space brother, whatever off-worlders, is another area, and that we have an association with that's very, very deep. And so this other gentleman had a recurring dream, and it was disturbing to him because it was of himself as, again, the grey features, as a grey creature, as a grey, but he recognized himself in his consciousness. And the thing was that he saw his own home planet exploding out and didn't want to die, didn't want to not be around anymore in consciousness. So he said that I don't know what the mechanism was and how it happened, but he took on a human form. So whether he was able to transfer his soul consciousness into a new baby here, and that was as easy as that, I'm not quite sure. And to be honest, I haven't looked at my old notes for a long time, but maybe there's something in there about that. So that kind of really got my interest. And then one of my dearest friends from Colombia, she knows Sixto Paz Wells very well. You may have heard of him. He's a Peruvian American contactee, probably around 60 now, but since he was 17, he's been having full-on contact experience. And he was the founder, or at least one of the founders, of Mission Rama. And Mission Rama has become really quite well known worldwide. And basically, before Stephen Greer was doing his CE5 protocols, Sixto Paz was doing that many years before him, and doing it with his group. And he traveled the world explaining to people about his experiences. I think the only book, well, there may be more than one. He's written many, many books. I don't know if it's gone into 20s now or whatever, Sixto, but of course, mainly they're in Spanish. The Invitation is the book that I have in English. It's the only one translated, I believe. But anyway, so, that was an amazing thing. And I got to interview Sixto just informally across my friend's dining room table some years ago. And, what a lovely person, what a very grounded, very kind, very beautiful soul. And, when we are in our right self, our right mind, our right energy, we can bring in the fantastic expression of those finer qualities and live them as a permanent process for ourselves of a kind, gentle nature. And that doesn't either mean that you're not strong and that you're not capable or that you're a pushover. Not at all, far from it. I know some people mix that up, those qualities up. But so that was very interesting. And then just as the years rolled on, I just did more and more research. And then I realized from talking to people and going to the odd conference about this subject that there wasn't too much in the UK. There was lots, it seems, in the US. And I just decided that it would be great, because a lot of people I spoke to or had association with over the years, one of the things that people said was that they feared, expressing themselves about their life-changing experiences. So they didn't feel they could. And some people had quite seriously lost families. They had lost their businesses. They had lost, friendships over years simply because they told their truth, which just happened to involve something that we call it's a very emotive phrase, alien abduction, or, some people may say, and there's a lot to be said for this, that we have a soul contract and that we know exactly what's going on when we come down here or into these realms. And that, this, once we kind of get a handle on that concept, that really there's nothing to be fearful of, and that this is just the outworking of something that we've intended to do as part of our own learning curve, and maybe, in helping to bring our own form of education, enlightenment, and sharing of human goodwill on the planet. So it's very interesting. So it's not a short answer.
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest question, and this is something that I'd like to prove to people who are non-believers, is would you say that for 100% for sure that alien abduction / contact, EET contact, is 100% physical, it's happening, and it's not something psychological?
I think it's a two-pronged answer. I think yes, in one aspect, and then there are other aspects which don't necessarily involve the physical body. Yes, the physical body is involved on some occasions, and on other occasions it's the etheric levels, some of the finer levels of the human being. And for those who may not know that, if you think of the Russian doll scenario with lots of little dolls on one within the other, we are the outer one. And then all those different layers inside course, they're really expanded out because our field goes many, many feet out, extended, and some people are sensitive enough to be able to feel that as a natural thing. And you know, we are naturally very, very sensitive creatures, and a lot of our sensibilities are a little bit squashed with a lot of the electromagnetics and a lot of, you know, our technology around us, as a matter of course. But some, despite all of that incursion into our field, can still really have a very good idea about all of those. And we call those people psychics, clairvoyant, clairaudience, and other terminology in different spheres. So it is interesting. But so yes, I think both for sure. I mean, I can tell you an experience that I had, if you would like, because you know, since I'm a really grounded person, so I am not prone to being psychic. I'm not prone to having phenomena happen to me, generally speaking. But since I started this work publicly, I have to say, I have been challenged somewhat and had one or two very interesting experiences. And one of them, which I consider physical. Now, you guys may have a different view, and I'd be interested to know what you think. So in the early days, I had someone I worked with, that is no longer, but I worked with them and they would do the editing and the filming whilst I had done all the interviewing and all the rest of that and organized things. So I was staying over at their place to work on some editing the next day because my travel, you know, I'd had to come from quite a way. So I'd bunk down on their settee, have my duvet over, and I'm always a night bird, late night bird. So I was still reading, and it was about 2 a.m. when this had all finished. This would be April, probably mid-April, and it would be 2012. Interesting date. Whether that means anything or not, I don't know. But so I put my book down, and the room was fairly dark. And it wasn't, although the room was quite big, it had a lot of furniture and racks in where there were, you know, video materials and equipment and all the rest of that. So the actual space in the room was quite small. It was probably no more than 12 foot by, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, maybe a little bit more, but not, you know, let's say 10. Anyway, it's not too much, 10, 12, whatever. Anyway, just to give you an idea of dimensions that where I was looking to. So I was lying on my right side, and so that would be me facing into the room. And there were some slatted vertical blinds, and they were closed, but there was an outside street lamp. So there was a little bit of light coming in, but it was fairly dark. And up in the upper left-hand corner of the room was a little red dot of a light, and that belonged to a camera, which was just checking on the cars outside as they were parked in the road. So no big deal, I'd seen it before. And then all of a sudden, I kind of noticed that the red light, seemed to become rather larger. And I can't remember how much a cent piece is, but if I just did this, so there we go. So from a little point of light, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters across, it went to something like that. And that's quite big. And I didn't see it grow or anything. It just suddenly seemed to be there. And I thought, well, how strange. I wonder what that is. So it was just a light. It was in its place in the upper left-hand corner. So I really didn't take too much notice of it. And then as I was kind of just settling myself down, so I wasn't asleep, not even sleepy actually, but I was just looking out to the middle of the room, and I noticed a thick black area evolve. Now, this has never happened to me before or since. And so the room was dark, but this thick black, I'm going to call it like a doorway. It sort of had the dimensions of a doorway. So however big a door is and the height, that's kind of how big this blackness was that was manifesting a little bit further away from me into the room. And I thought, what the hell? Because I could see this physically. I wasn't asleep. I was looking. I just put my book down. I thought, well, that is very strange. What the hell's that? And it's like you might see a mist, except this was the opposite. It wasn't a white misty. It was a dark black. It was blacker than black, that kind of black that you hear people mentioning. And just as I was thinking, well, what the heck could that possibly be? Out of it came, believe it or believe it not, a man. Now,
a what?
A man.
Oh, wow.
I know. And I honestly, I know I'm going to say something that the people who ever phone me say right off the bat. They say, I know this is going to sound crazy. So I'm going to say that disclaimer. I know it's going to sound crazy. So out came this very wiry, small individual. When I say small, I don't mean he was a pygmy. I mean, he was like, maybe I'm 5'3". So he would be, I'd say 5'6". He could have been 5'8", but I think he was about 5'6". He was quite petite, a petite gentleman. And, it's very interesting. Now, this was, as far as I'm concerned, this was not ET. He had quite high set shoulders. And what I mean by that, like normally you can see a human being, and they look like they have their neck set slightly low or their shoulders set slightly high. In England, we often say it looks like they've got a coat hanger stuck in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had that look. He hadn't got a coat hanger stuck, but this man was all in black. And when I say all in black, it was as if there was some kind of covering, skin-tight covering, including his head and face. And I could see the two limbs. It was clearly a man. And the first thing I thought of was military black ops. I had already had my phone interfered with, and other things have been going on. And I thought, oh my God, this is like in your face. And I'm seeing this physically. I'm touching things, and I'm, the researcher in me is kicking in, going, what can I smell? What can I taste? Anything? Nothing at all. And I could not hear anything either. So he made no sound. I couldn't even hear any breathing, though so what happened then was a bit of a shock, because he made straight for me, which was only a matter, it wouldn't have been much more than 4 steps, maybe 5 at the most, to me. And I was, I sensed that I might be in danger. I mean, I don't know if I was or not, but I just, it's not often you have some individual popping in to your space out of the blackness of another blackness for no reason that you can see. I mean, wow, what was that? So anyway, he came over to me, and as he came over to me, and I'm still lying on my right side, and what I did is not to engage him, because I didn't know if that was safe, and I didn't want to try and find out. I kept my eyes sort of as if you might look under the eyelashes, as you might say, so they were open, but just like half, like when you're squinting at something. So I could see everything clearly. And he came over, and I could see him coming over, and he came over, I mean, honest to God, as near as that is that I'm showing you now. And as he did that, it caused a massive electric shock to my whole body.
Oh, wow.
Which freaked the bejesus out of me again. And then he stayed there, just so he didn't sort of put a knee on the settee or wherever I was to steady himself. He just had his head right over me, watching me for, I don't know, it could have been 3 or 4 seconds. It could have been a bit longer. It seemed like an age. And then he got up. And as he got up, you know how an elastic band does dink and it snaps back like that? There was a snapping back electrically, and he got up, and right at the end of the sofa that I was sleeping on, or about to sleep on, where it was the doorway to the next room, which was a small kitchen. And beyond that small kitchen was another very small room, which was a little conservatory, which had been kitted out for editing. And that's where I worked with this person when we were editing. And I never saw that guy again. So I couldn't sleep. I did not sleep. I didn't know what he did. I couldn't hear anything. I wanted to follow him. I definitely wasn't brave enough. Not in my PJs anyway. And so I just, I was awake. I was awake till people got up in the morning. It was 9 o'clock. Nobody heard anything. But as I said to my then colleague, right, he'd got a lodger. I said, I'm going to ask the lodger if he'd seen, heard, felt anything at all. So I was about to race upstairs to do that. And as I stood underneath the door jamb, literally underneath it, between where the room was, where I'd been sleeping, and just finishing off my chat with this guy, before I went up the stairs, I this was extraordinary. I felt all of a sudden as if I was standing under a physical shower of light and protection and love. It was absolutely, it almost took my breath away. And it was as if, I don't know what it was as if, maybe that something was letting me know that despite what had happened, I was actually protected and that no harm was ever going to come to me. I don't know, guys, but all I can tell you that was very strange. And I've never had anything like that before. Now, people say, well, maybe it was just a hologram, but would a hologram cause a physical response in me, like an electrical discharge, an electrical, and also twice. So the first time when he leaned over me, and then the second time when he got up and decided to take himself off into the other room for whatever reason, I don't know. My ex-colleague was thinking that maybe they were interfering with our work, which was all to do with the experiencer. And then I did an interview. I had a contact with a wonderful man called Stuart Neal. And his interview is out there on my YouTube channel. And he was, I forget which war it was that he stood on a landmine and sustained some brain injury from that. But he contacted me because he said he knew what it was that I experienced. And what he said that was something called a glimmer man. And he said that he'd been in the special forces and he'd done a 2-year tour of duty in this particular group, regiment, I don't know what you'd call it, where they were tasked, and they wore black. They all wore black, and it was all skin tight stuff. And he said, but what we did, he said, we were, this is really, bad stuff, but he's under, he's another experiencer as well, absolutely astonishing. But he was tasked with, as well as his colleagues, with whatever job they were given to go into a civilian's home and go and raid their computer, go and do something, whatever it was that they were tasked with that the military black ops people were up to, they did. And they said, if it should happen that anybody woke up in the household or that they was, or anybody was around, they would put on these, they said it was like a cloak, like an invisibility cloak. And that may sound a bit far-fetched, but I remember seeing several years ago, an image in one of the war areas in Afghanistan or wherever, and you can see a guy wandering from a tank to another location, and then suddenly he's not there. It's like he's put something over him. So I know this stuff has been going on for a very, very long time, that kind of technology. So, and now, in my opinion, I don't think that was he said we were called glimmer men because now and again people got a glimpse of them. And he was an absolute sweetheart. And in the interview, you can see he's got, some brain damage there, but he still tells some of his ET experiences incredibly well. So that was very kind of him to share that. I still don't think it was a glimmer man. I could be wrong, but I think it was something more because the guy, when he leaned over me, I could see the outline of his face. I couldn't see the detail like, I might recognize you again, Robert, or what have you. No, I wouldn't, because there were no features really, really clearly there. But you could see he'd got a nose. You could see he'd got ears.
I have an opinion. I think from being around so many cases of ET contact and you were doing paranormal as well, right?
Well, yeah. It's the territory seems to go hand in hand.
Yeah, because when you expose yourself to that much paranormal, maybe possibly a portal opened up and an entity came out, and we don't know what that entity was. I was going to say a shadow person at first, but
I think he had a lot of substance to him. He wasn't much of a shadow. He was
So I've never heard of any kind of entity like that, but it sure was interesting. But let me ask you this. Do you think that that's something that the military might have, this entity? And what all do you think kind of things our military do have, like reverse engineered craft?
Oh, God, yes. I absolutely do. Look, there's been far too much going on right from Tesla up to now with the Nazis. I mean, Admiral Byrd, all that, Antarctica stuff. Absolutely. We've got John Hutchinson. He's still with us. And the English guy, John Searle, only died a couple of years ago. These guys were creating anti-gravity, of course, absolutely, without question. There's no doubt in my mind. You've got Ralph Ring, the wonderful Ralph Ring, who's still with us. And, I remember a story that he told that he'd actually, I don't know if I think it was to do with anti-gravity as well. He was working for one company and they said, okay, so he'd solved that problem. They said, look, we get our grants, so we don't need you to solve any problem. Just carry on at your desk, doing whatever. But don't tell us you solved the problem, because that would mean, the money flow changes and all the rest of that. In fact, the very short-sighted people that they are, they haven't, they don't realize what an amazing world and what opportunities and jobs would be available to all these, all these extended facilities and things that would be available with this work. I mean, David Adair's another one, he's talking about hospitals in space and all kinds of amazing stuff. So 110%, in my opinion, yes.
Okay. The question I had for you is about I want to get into your two experiencers. I want to hear about the one that stepped on the landmine and then the one that you co-authored the book about. But I have an important question to ask you about your contactee abductee line. In the 80s and 90s, the Greys seem to have a breeding hybridization program. Like, actually, last night, I stayed up late last night and I was listening to an interview on a channel I like called Beyond Explanation. And it was with a guy, and he told his story about how him and his girlfriend were taken. They kept getting abducted. She was in her third trimester. The Greys took her and him one night. They had them suspended in animation. What I mean is they couldn't move. And the Greys made him watch the Grey remove the baby from her body. Then later, he was forced to see his hybrid child and interact with it, and the Greys take it away with it. I guess I have two questions from you. Do you get a lot of this, and do you think this is still going on?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't know if it is to the same degree, because I haven't really got a handle on, my research hasn't taken me going into all the figures and numbers over the years, so I haven't done any comparative study. But there's a lady called Hilary Porter who runs BEAMS in the UK, which is BEAMS stands for the British Earth Aerial Mysteries Society, run by her partner Kenneth John Parsons and herself, Hilary Porter. And Hilary was telling me a story, and it is in her recent book as well. But I also interviewed Hilary, and that's, she'd be an amazing lady to interview as well, Robert. And she was telling me that she'd had her little girl, and there was some problems, so she had to go back into hospital. And anyway, she was alone at this time, and she needed the bathroom, and she was feeling well enough to get up and go herself, so she did. But as she was going, she passed a large cupboard area which was open, and to her absolute horror and shock, she saw in there were jars of varying sizes with what can only be described by her, she said, as alien kind of fetuses at one stage of development or another. So that was a long time ago. And then there was someone who told me recently, and I can't name them because I promised I wouldn't, but I know them very well, and I have no doubt about the veracity of what they've said. And they told me that so many years ago that he and his wife were having a child, and they were all excited about that. Anyway, so at that time, the hospitals would usher the dad out and say, no, it's not coming yet, come back and we'll call you when. Anyway, so when he went back, the child had been born. So he was a bit fed up about having missed the birth. But anyway, he then arrived to hear that the child was, I think if it wasn't stillborn, it was just a few hours of life before it was taken away. And he said, well, to his wife, well, I want to see our child. Even if it's has no life. I just want to set eyes on it and that's ours. She said, oh, you can't. She said, anyway, it's just as well because it looked horrendous. She said it had a big head. It had big black eyes and it looked a bit deformed. And then, and here's the kicker, if that's not enough, they said she's told him that she'd been told that somebody from Cambridge University, and Cambridge and Oxford University in the UK are very famous universities, you know, kind of old, very old school, that someone from Cambridge University had come to take the body of this child. Why?
That's amazing.
Why? So I do think it is going on. I don't know, Robert, if it is going on to the same degree, but it is definitely, you know, still happening. And for whatever reason, you know, people say it's because they're upgrading us. And, you know, this is part of our agreement, our soul agreement that we've come in to help, you know, that maybe this is us from another time frame as well. So it is us helping ourselves, if you like, in a kind of a different way of looking at it. So there's lots of options, and I don't know if we have the answers yet, Robert. I don't know if we have enough information yet, and maybe that time will come. But yeah. I think yet there's quite a lot that isn't that we can't access. We don't have enough. Yeah, I just say information. I'm just repeating myself now.
No, that was amazing answer. I know I was wondering if you could share with me the two contact experiences. The one where you talk about the guy who stepped on the landmine, who's had amazing contact experiences, and then Bill Brooks, whichever one you want to get into first, and if you don't mind sharing them both.
No, not at all. Well, you know, with Stuart Neal, I'd probably have to go and look at the interview myself again and on my notes. But his what's interesting about Stuart is that, I mean, bless him, and he and his friend, who'd both been in special services, offered to be my protectors, to protect me because they knew I was coming in for some flack. Because it's interesting. I mean, I don't know what your audience thinks or knows about this, but sometimes people like you or I, we also get subjected to attacks of one kind or another, surveillance and that kind of thing. And that can be a little bit tricky to deal with. So it's kind of an interesting. So I thought it was lovely when Stuart said that he and his friend would offer to be my protectors. And, you know, bless him, he had a family and he had his own injury to deal with. So I declined, but just told him to keep an eye out. But he was the one who told me, as I said, about the Glimmerman. And then when he told me his story, I don't know if you've seen that interview, I think he's just amazing. I mean, it's, you know, there is a big disclaimer at the front which says, you know, he is not drunk. this is the result, his speech patterns are the result of brain injury. And his family has a 700 year, I correct myself, 700 year history of having association in the military. And his dad did, and so did he. And he was in Australia for quite a long time. And he and his brother wandered off into the bush one time and got completely lost. I mean, and there were very many miles and they knew they had to get back. And this gentleman's kind of showed up out of nowhere and made sure that the boys got home safely. And they never saw that gentleman again, didn't know who he was. So he's had a lot of things, and he was from a fairly large family, and all the kids had experiences. And then he talked about, and you'd have to forgive me, I forget all the detail now. So a while ago since I have seen Robert's interview myself and read my notes back. But he talked about having, that all of them had a little mark right on their tailbone, which he associated with the ET experiences. And his father, and I think his mother, and I think sadly his mother couldn't handle all this material going, you know, that came out of experiences and stuff, and she decided to take her own life, which
wow.
You know, it is, you know, and this is what's so important to me as well, and for everybody listening, you know, this is no laughing matter, and I'm not saying you can't have fun with the subject and you can't learn a lot from it. But, you know, for people to have the courage to come forward and to speak, whatever you may think about the subject, is huge. And, you know, I just applaud them, because for me, as far as I'm concerned, this is part of my education. This is part of our education, wherever that leads, whatever that means for us all. And, you know, and that brings me kind of to Bill Brooks in a way, because Bill contacted me in about probably 2012 again, after a series of heart attacks and strokes. And he was only in his mid-60s then, and he really thought he wasn't going to make it. He thought he was about to finally die, because he was so poorly. And one of the reasons he was so poorly, he took a lot of flack for a lot of reasons, which are a bit too complex to go in now. But people, if they want to listen to any interviews I've done with him, we've got loads of interviews that we've done together. We can no longer do those together now because he's not well enough. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But just to get back to how he came to call me, was that he hadn't really had anybody take him seriously over the years. And what had happened with Bill was that all his life, he thought that people like you and me were complete fruitcakes. I mean, he just thought that we had a screw loose. And because up until the age he was 44, and don't ask me why 44 was a trigger date for him, or trigger year age, I've no idea. He doesn't know either. But he honestly didn't believe in anything to do with the paranormal, anything to do with ET or UFOs. And yet all his life, since being a youngster, I mean, I don't mean a baby in the cot, but definitely a toddler, he had had experiences. And then what happened was, which was about 20 years before he had contacted me, so 1994 would be when he was 44, he had this incredible download. And the route it took was that, so he was arriving home, he was a musician, he was living in Wales in the UK, and he was crossing over an area called the Berwin mountain. And I've been to this mountain. It's not so much a mountain like you know, it's more a very long hill. And quite high though, but not like mountain peaks. Anyway, so the Berwin mountain is also very famous. I'll put this in just quickly, because I think it was, I can't remember if it was 73 or 1974, that there was an alleged crash on the Berwin mountain. Very, very famous case, if any, or alleged case. Anyway, so Bill was coming over this area, and it was quite a while, and then he was suddenly nearly home. And what had happened during that trip was that over the Berwin mountain, he'd seen a UFO, and it sort of went along the contours of the terrain of the mountain. And he got an old Volvo car, and they had very long bonnets, and he could actually see, now he's remembered, the reflection. So that was amazing. And then, so he got home, didn't know that, we think that was probably an abduction event, because 26 miles later, he sort of comes to consciousness, and he's about 3 miles from home. And then, so what his routine was to put his treasured guitar away under his new baby, or 8-month-old baby's cot. That was his other treasured thing in life. And the lady was asleep, and then he'd go sit down in his lounge, have a drink, have a smoke, and just analyze his performance and put the TV on as background company. And that was it. And that was what he was in the habit of doing. So this one night he did that, the same, but before, I can't remember which way it goes right now, but anyway, so when he got out of the car, this is before he sat down and had his drink now, and I've been to all of these main locations that Bill had these experiences in, he went to about 50 yards from his door, because and Bill was in the army, and he was trained as a sniper, also as radio and comms. And so he was pretty good at distance. He was pretty good at observation. And what he saw, though this immediately was wiped as he went in the door, So this is interesting, and then we'll come back, bring you back to this point. He saw this 300-foot cone-shaped vehicle, ship, craft, and it was splattering out all of this electrical energy. I mean, and he was, part of the electrical thing in the army, electrical work, and he said he must have stood about 20 minutes just looking at it. And when I said, well, how far or how close were you to it? He said, maybe 10 feet. So he didn't touch it because being an electrician as well, he knew that, that wouldn't be a good idea. I said, well, what did you think it was? Because he has this fantastic ability to come up with the most incredible explanations. And he said, I knew that there was I knew there was a fair, like a fun fair, not, that traveling fun fair, and that it was set up in the town 5 miles away. And he said, I just thought it was a laser display. I went, really? I mean, he was so locked out to anything to do with this. It just beggars belief. I can't believe what he says to me sometimes. Or it took from 2012 to 2016, it took me nearly three and a half years to write this book. With him, I was writing it, he was telling me the story. Anyways, and it was because I just couldn't get my head, not because, but sometimes I couldn't get my head around what he was telling me. In the true reality of it. And, I know he's telling me the truth. So then he went back in, completely forgot what he'd just seen, forgot about the fact that he'd missed 26 miles of road coming in, and that he'd just seen a UFO. None of that was there. So now he is sitting down having a drink and whatever. And all of a sudden, his TV turns into a portal, for want of a better term, where these greys suddenly appear like their heads. And he said, and as that's happening, he said, I'm noticing that my wall suddenly begins, in the book we call it undulating. It sort of seems to kind of develop a life of its own. And he said, and embossed, as if it was embossed, there seemed to be some kind of hieroglyphic symbols appearing. He doesn't know what they were, no idea. Anyway, so with that, he said, the next thing I knew is that I had this incredible, now I'm calling it's a download. It's a download. And what it did to this man is to break his head open. His closed-mindedness was no more. But it also sent him, kind of spiraling into wondering if he was insane, if he'd had a mental breakdown, and, what the heck was going on. Because what this did, it was a bit like you hear NDEs, so that's near-death experience reporters saying, and that is often that they will see their entire life played back on, like as if it's on a film. And that's exactly what he saw. Though he wasn't having a near-death experience, there was no death element involved, except it was death to the old self, to the old mental processes and the old psychology for sure. So that sent him into, as I said, this spiral of fear, terror for some while. He hit the bottle for a couple of years. He said, I had no one to tell. I had nowhere to go to. And when he'd been awake all night, and when his lady got up in the morning, he was just wandering around in a circle, and just repeating, I've been abducted. And she went, what's the matter? He said, I've been abducted by aliens. And he wasn't laughing. I'm laughing because I can just, it's some of this has comedic impact.
Definitely.
It's like if you wrote it as a comic strip, it would be hysterical. If it didn't hurt you so much, if it didn't cause the trauma that it caused. And she said, what do you mean? What? When? He said, what, last night? He said, no, all my life. And so there was this guy who thought, I would, he said, you wouldn't have liked me back then, Joanne. He said, because I just wouldn't tolerate anything like this. But he was, so look, what is this all about? Why would he have that experience? Well, look, someone so locked out to another reality. And I mean, he wasn't just locked out. He'd got bolts, he'd got padlocks, he'd got everything to stop any other sense of reality coming in that might make him look in another direction at who he was, at what was in his life. So, this is very interesting. I find it absolutely as a psychological event. very interesting. Now, because this traumatized him so much, and it really did, because he remembered things about the army, and if you want, we can talk about his army bit next. That was because that involved Area 51, and that always gets a bit of attention, doesn't it?
No,
So
definitely.
he just so what happened psychologically to him pretty much immediately after then, and I don't mean in the next hour, I mean over a few days or maybe a few weeks. I really can't remember how long this took, but it's as if all the entire stretch of memories bar one went into the back shelf of his consciousness, not hidden like they'd been before, not in his subconscious. They were just put back here where he could be safe in the front. And this one major memory of which he has the most recall played out and played out and played out. And you imagine this happening to you guys. I mean, imagine something you don't believe, whatever that is. And then something is up personal, close, and hits you in the face and batters you around the head. And there's no way you cannot ignore it, or you can ignore it. It is just an incredible thing. And for someone like Bill Brooks, who was a real black and white man, he just didn't believe in the grays of life. And I don't mean that as a pun. I just mean in the other layers and dimensions. No. But he has had the most extraordinary set of experiences. So Robert, I don't know whether you'd like me to talk about Bill's army experience, because
Sure.
that is off
We have a
the
couple more
charts,
minutes.
crazy. I don't know if you have any questions, or if you have anybody there has had any questions, or you got
Well,
any.
do you have a theory as to why he was picked by these extraterrestrials to have these experiences? Do you think he could be a starseed?
Well, you know what? Why wouldn't he be? I mean, what does that mean anyway? It just means that some people come to consciousness and have energy. Now, what this man is, what Bill is, he's a complete rebel. And that tends to come with starseeds. So he's a guy who can have a stent put in his heart because he's just had his heart attack, and not the ones I've just been talking about either. And he can be in hospital, and he can be talking to all the other patients going, this allopathic medicine is no good for you at all. And then when he left, when he was discharged, they wanted to give him this massive bag full of medication. He said, well, I'm not taking it. I'm not taking any of it. You can put it where your sun don't shine. He was very strong about it. And so this is a guy who's had some major heart issues, major heart surgery, and has not taken one bit of medication, and is still here to tell the tale, although he has died once since. And I can talk about that another time. He's still here. Here, just.
Well, I have one more question. How did the Men in Black, a serial killer, and the Freemasons tie into it?
Okay. That's a lot. That's huge. So look, the Men in Black element is pretty much linked with the army. So why don't I start there? Remind me about the serial killer, and remind me, if we have time, about the Freemasons.
Okay.
The story is huge. And, even writing the book, there's not everything you can write in a book. Otherwise it's too much. But, but we, what we wrote, it's pretty incredible. And when we came to the publication, when I finally was ready to publish and, happy with the work, Bill got really scared because he'd had so much trouble, mainly at the hands of humans, Freemasons and such, that he said, and he's got, his boy was now a young man, and he said, look, I'm really concerned that if we just put it out there as this is the fact of the matter, instead of saying based on, he said, I feel that it's possible my son would come in for some flack and maybe be targeted, and all of that. And these aren't people with a lot of money, maybe no money sometimes. So not a lot of recourse to resources. So we put based on. There's no, it is based on, but it's actually every word is true. There's nothing that is, there's nothing that has been either, you know, made more of or made less of. The only thing that he would not let me add and would not speak to me about are some of the experiences which can be very, very tricky to discuss. And I won't discuss them at this point on this one, but are those involving sexuality and sexual experience, because that seems to go with the territory. You know, that can be extremely traumatic for people. Yeah. So anyway, and also there is just so much you can say sometimes in one book. And what we've said, wow, that's enough. It's an amazing story. And you know, mostly we hear about things happening in the US or maybe Canada, but generally the US has a lot of exposure to this sort of stuff. But when I heard his story, I thought, well, good heavens, I haven't heard anything like this at all. So let's go to Bill. Being 18. Now, where Bill grew up was a place called the Black Country, which is, for point of reference, it's not a million miles from Birmingham, which is sort of central or West Midlands. In fact, he said that he saw Robert Plant from, the rock star guy, would do one of his first ever concerts because they're a similar age in his nearest town called Stourbridge, which is amazing. And there's also another Robert Plant seems to have a few links with Bill one way or another. It's very interesting. Anyway, so Bill was 18 when he joined the army, and he just did so because, like a lot of young people or young men, they not quite sure what to do with themselves and think, well, you know, I'll learn something in the army. And that was the reason for that, generally speaking. So after he did, and he had some amazing things happen, even in the training. So we'll start with that. So he was about a day or so away from being on the passing out parade and all of that little celebration and ceremony, and his parents and friends were going to be there. And so on a day or two prior to that event, so he passed his 3 months or whatever it was training. So the guys were now in the gym and they were just put through their paces, and Bill had shimmied up a rope. And you know these great big ropes that you shimmy up? I mean, how big are they, guys? Are they about that around? They're big, aren't they? Yeah. Big and heavy, and they're attached. So gravity's on them. I'm saying all this for a reason. And it was attached to a metal joist at the top. And so Bill was at the top, had got to the top. And he's a slight man as well. He's about 5'8" and very slender. And when he was at the top, all of a sudden, this rope lost its gravity, and this rope would be weighing many stones. So that's many, many, many pounds. I mean, I don't know how many pounds, you know, a rope length of that width would be on the scales, but it's not small or insignificant. And this rope wound itself round his neck. And so he was being strangled. He was being strangled and could not, and nobody noticed. The interesting thing is that normally there's somebody at the bottom of the rope holding it or watching you go. On this occasion, maybe because it was the end of their training, who knows, and they were just all, you know, chilled out, not doing the protocol. Anyway, that meant that he was up there being strangled and nobody noticed, and he thought he was going to die. He thought, oh my God, that's it. And these ropes are thick, around the little neck, you know, gosh. So all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. He doesn't know what happened, but this rope seemed to release itself or unwind itself from his neck. And as he got down, when he got down, not as he got down, he'd got a lot of injury around his neck. He'd got the rope marks, he'd got red wheels, and his windpipe was sore. And he told his CO, and he was so poorly with it, he couldn't go on parade to get his passing out parade ceremony. Then he was passed out, but because you have to wear a uniform, and the uniform is tight up, and he had to go to the hospital. He was taken to the military hospital there. So that was a very weird thing. And how about this for a super weird corroborative event, which is not Bill's event, but somebody else. But because I'd never heard of this sort of thing before, and I don't know whether any of your listeners will have, but if they have, I'd really like to hear from them. So I've been doing some interviews with an amazing guy called Mike Oram, who's a similar age to Bill Brooks. He's written a book called Does It Rain in Other Dimensions about his own experiences. And I gave him Bill's book to read, our book to read. And he said, oh, I can't believe it, Joanne. I can't believe that experience that Bill had. And he said, because I had something really similar when I was 8. So like 10 years difference in age. And what had happened with Mike Oram was that he was growing up in the East End of London. His dad had put a boxing bag on the door because, you know, living in fairly poor conditions, and that's where they had space. And so his dad was out the room, his mum had gone shopping. And so an 8-year-old Mike is just, I don't know whether he's messing around with the bag or whatever. And all of a sudden, the bag, which is weighted and quite heavy, loses its gravity, and the rope goes around this little boy's neck to such a degree that he's about to die. And then his father rushes in, sees what's happening, thinks that his son has somehow messed around with the bag to the point where he could entangle himself. Well, of course he couldn't. How can an 8-year-old pick up a bag and then get your neck high enough to get it wrapped around the strap? No. So what is that? I don't know. That is very weird. So that was the only other time I've ever heard of anybody experiencing anything like that.
Can I give you my input to what I think is happening?
Please do. Please do.
I think both of them might be star seeds, and they might be actual races of ETs, both Bill and this Mike guy, and they might be being targeted by other races of ETs.
Oh, I think that could be right. You know, that's, yeah, you might well be right there.
Yeah.
Because certainly these people, both of them, you know, I'd say they're very good people. They're you know, they'll do you a kindness if they can first. I'm not saying they won't stand their ground either. I don't mean that. I just mean, you know, they're what you'd call good people. And rebels in their own way as well, not just following, you know, the party line, as they say, that kind of thing. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that Mike Oram story with you because, I mean, how crazy and wild is that? So when people ring me and say, what I'm going to tell you is going to sound really crazy, I say, well, okay, try me, because I've heard a lot of crazy things, and I don't think anybody's crazy so far. So when Bill got into the army, it's just really interesting. I mean, he was sent to a place called Sennelager in Germany, and it was a base that was being used by the Americans as well as the British, and it was being shared by personnel from Area 51. And those guys were there because it wasn't known at the time, I don't think, that there were nuclear weapons on that base. And they were called Honest Johns. And the Area 51 personnel, as far as we can glean, were there to deal with the Honest Johns, because every now and again they would do a test fire and all the rest of that. And the interesting thing is, though, that the Brits were told emphatically that they were not to fraternize in any way, shape or form with the Americans. You know, what was that story? Why not? So I think there was something else going on because of what I'm about to tell you. And so yeah, there were some Americans around. They didn't see them very often. So when Bill arrived, most of the people there were away on a live firing exercise, and they were coming back the following day. So at the unit there were probably only about 16 of them. So they were sent on an exercise. So he was with a guy called John. And he and John were sent off by the NCO to do a bit of a practice exercise. And this was in this place, there's something called the Sennelager Ranges, which is where they used to practice with the tanks. And it was overlooking a field, and there were woods just to set the scene. Anyway, so these guys, it should have been a 2-hour on, 2-hour off duty. Anyway, after 2 hours, nobody came for them. So they just thought, well, let's stay here because we don't really want to do any work or anything else.
Yeah.
We'll just chill out. So that's what the guys did. And then Bill said they noticed this orange mist start coming in. And they thought, oh, okay, this is a gas attack, a kind of exercise by some other of the team. We better go and alert the NCO and the rest of the guys. And so they did that. And they said, well, we don't know what you're talking about because the exercise has been stood down. Everybody's been stood down. Obviously, somebody had forgotten to tell these guys who were somewhere way at these rangers sitting around guarding. Mm-hmm. And so they said, well, everybody's gone to bed, go and get some rest. So the guys did, well, there weren't very many places available. I don't know why, because, anyway, they were all new there. So what they saw was a Saracen, a vehicle, and with all its camouflage stuff, and on the top of it had got all this netting and all that more kind of camouflage stuff. So, made a very comfy bed. So up they went, because you had to access it by a little ladder on the side. And so they were sitting having a last cigarette. And as they were doing that, looking out, they saw these kind of, he said it looked a bit like, not snow, but this white stuff coming down. He said actually it looked a bit like skulls, had some kind of skull element looking at whatever this material or matter was coming down in front of them. And if that wasn't weird enough, then their attention was caught by the men below. The men below, and they had quite a good point of view because they're at the top of this Saracen vehicle. They all seemed to be moving, I'm not sure if he said in unison, but certainly they were all together. And they all seemed to be almost like they were sleepwalking. And they were all going off in one direction. And Bill thought, what the heck is that? Where are they going? They hadn't heard any orders. They hadn't heard any, instructions. Anyway, it turns out that Bill decided to get down and have a look. Now, meanwhile, his mate John had turned around and could see into the distance where the woods were. There were some people coming out and he could see that they were armed. And he shouted to Bill, don't get down, don't get down. But Bill was already just about on the way down by that time. And anyway, Bill being Bill with his will of iron was always going to do what he was going to do. So as he hopped onto the ground, he was met by a guy wearing all black with a blue insignia badge on his, I think, right arm, which he doesn't remember the detail of, and a blonde crew cut American style haircut. And he was and with a Beretta, but it wasn't a Beretta. He said it was quite a lot bigger than a Beretta, but it had the look of a Beretta gun, or anyway, firing piece in his hand. And he just said to Bill, go into the light, go to the light. And Bill could see just beyond where this guy was, there was a big sphere of light. And anyway, he hesitated because he thought, what the heck? And this guy cocked his gun and said, now get into the light. So that's all he remembered of that event. And he doesn't remember any of this until he was 44. And the memories came back slowly over the 20-year period up until when he called me. And so the next thing he has memory of to do with this, and this all happened in the first week that he had arrived at Senalaga as his new first.
Wow. That's weird. Well, that's some really weird stuff going on right away.
Oh, well, you haven't heard the half of it. So the next thing he remembers, and stop me if you want to ask a question or anything, he is on parade. And he's on parade. Now, because it was a nuclear facility there, he had to sign an official secrets agreement. So here he is now, and he's standing next to his buddy John, who's whispering in his ear to him. And by the way, Bill doesn't know how he's got to be on parade. He's just comes to consciousness and there he is. No idea that he got there. And because the guys were all drinkers, they thought, well, was I drunk last night? Anyway. So meanwhile, John is whispering in his ear something along the lines that they were abducted by ET, and Bill thinks, oh my God, this guy's a lunatic. He's drunk. Anyway, so as they're on parade, there's real big brass there. Now, he's a brand new guy in the army. He doesn't know what the protocol is. He doesn't know it's a huge, big deal that the big brass are standing there in front of them instead of their NCO. He knows now, but he didn't know then. He just thought it was ordinary. As he said, at that time, I didn't know anything. I just thought whatever was happening to me was how things went. So then what he noticed is this. He noticed that a lot of the guys seemed to be in battle fatigues. Now, just to put this in context, battle fatigues were the old style uniform, if you like, army gear that people used to wear up until the late 1950s. And during the 1950s, so Bill, this is 1968 now, and so they're still phasing out all of this gear, but it's essentially camouflage gear now, or fatigues as they call them. Anyway, so Bill did notice that there were quite a few people in the old-fashioned gear. Now, it was no big deal because, look, he's a new guy still. He doesn't know what's what. As far as he's concerned, that's probably normal. And then he said, and when I think about it, I think John was in that gear as well. Well, this is absolutely amazing, because what happened then is, so there are now 3 men in black, 3 guys with pistols or these Berettas, he can't remember which, pointing them at this 16 group of men or more, whatever, ready to go in case there's any dissent in the group. And they are made to sign another cache of secret papers. So he said, I don't even know what that was about. And then he was, and they were all told that they were never to speak of this event again. And Bill goes, speak about what?
He couldn't remember.
No,
yeah.
He didn't remember till he was 44. So he was only 18 at this time.
Yeah.
So then what happens, and I'm going to shoot forward 40 odd years to round the story out because it's just astonishing. So Bill had thought when he was about, 60, this is before he contacted me, that he was going to try and find his old buddy, John Jerome's, that he'd been abducted with in this first week, because he was actually abducted twice, but I can tell you about the second time if you like, or we can talk about another element of what went on. And when the Men in Black feature here in a minute. And this John Jerome's, that's a very unusual surname over here, but he managed to get hold of John's brother. He'd found an old number that he tried to contact from some time before. And what was amazing is that in the army at those days, you could bring in or invite, it's kind of like invite your a family member in, say like your brother, to join the army with you. And it was like a special, arrangement. I don't know I forget what they called it. Anyway, so Bill remembers now seeing John's brother with him, who's I think called Jez. And he witnessed the 2 brothers fighting, and he was going to part them, and he himself was pulled off by the other members of the party. Said, no, you don't interfere with brothers fighting. So I said, oh God, I didn't realize. Anyway, so with that in mind, here is Bill 40 or more years later speaking to Jez, the brother. And so this guy's absolutely astonished to be hearing from Bill. And he says, and Bill says, I know your brother. I was in the army with him. In fact, I want to talk to him about something that happened to us. And Jez says to him, well, you won't be able to speak to him. Nobody can. He's become a hermit for all these years. A recluse. He won't speak to anybody. And he keeps just going on about aliens and abduction and all the rest of that. And nobody can speak to him. He just won't have it. And Bill said, well, that's what I want to speak to him about. And he said, well, you can't. And anyway, and then he says, but just a minute, he said, when were you in the army? So Bill tells him, and he says, well, that's impossible. impossible that you knew us. He said, because we were in the 50s and we were not in 1968. So that would kind of make sense of why John was wearing the battle fatigues.
Wow.
And there seems to be Bill seems to be time traveling a bit, or either he's gone into the 1950s or something else has happened. I mean, we haven't quite got it, because this is not the first time something like this has happened to him.
That's very weird.
Oh, weird? Oh my God, yeah, it is extraordinary. It is really one of the most extraordinary cases. I mean, because, you know, within a week or 10 days at the most, he was abducted twice, and with John. So that first occasion where he was forced into the light at gunpoint by some American, now what were those Americans doing? You know, what was that story? Were they, you know, I think that at that time, whether it was 1958 or 68, there was clearly between the Brits and the Americans some kind of experimental process going on, working with ETs, or maybe it was reverse engineered, and that I don't quite know the story there. But listen to this. This is really wild. This is where the Men in Black sort of come in, and they aren't the Men in Black as we hear about the Men in Black generally, but these were Americans dressed as Men in Black. And so before I tell you that little bit, I'll just give you a bit of Bill's background, is in that he came from a very, very poor background. He had no education. He did not go to school bar for 6 months when he was 13, and I think for a few months when he was, 13 and 5 or 6 or something. And then he never went. He was a nature boy. He could attract animals in. Animals would come to him. Oh, he had the most amazing experience of going aboard a ship when he was just a kid. And I can perhaps tell you that next if you'd like to hear that, because that is a most astonishing story after I tell you the Men in Black bit. So Bill was dyslexic, and when he failed his entry into the army exam, they said to him, "Oh, don't worry, you'll soon pick it up." I mean, really? What's going on there? So I just think that somehow he was earmarked, don't ask me why or how, or for, you know, how that came about, you know, from the Americas to the army to the Germany. What? It's an amazing convoluted series of threads. Anyway, so
go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I was just going to say, so Bill also was not well read, not read at all. He was dyslexic, so he had a lot of trouble reading, and he was dyslexic before people even knew about dyslexia. They found out in the army, actually, that he was dyslexic. He did learn to read and write in the army. He couldn't read and write. So that just tells you something about where Bill was in his development on, you know, in his skill level, schooling wise. And that's because what I'm about to tell you has a bearing on it. So what the guys would do, what it was their habit to do when they had done all their duties and everything in Senalaga, was there were a couple of pubs, beer houses, not too far away. And the guys would either go to one or the other and sometimes meet up. And Bill would often wander up alone, because he's quite a lone bird, and catch up with some of the guys and have a chat when he got to the bar and all that. However, what began happening was that when Bill would go out, which would be by himself, so there wasn't anybody else there, this great big stretch limo would turn up. Or not stretch limo, sorry, big Lincoln. It's the Lincoln. Put me in mind of the stretch limo. Big Lincoln. It was black. And there would be the guy all in black as the driver. And then there'd be a guy in black, who was an American, it seemed, from his accent, Bill would go in the car with him. I said, "Well, what made you get into the car with them?" He said, "Well, I don't know what they said, but I just did." And he said, "But also, you know, they also had like a special branch, like security services there." So he said, "Well, for all I know, they could have just been security." And I said, "Well, don't you remember at all what they said to you? He said, no, I really don't. And what's interesting and somewhat disturbing is that they would take him to, on each of the 3 or 4 occasions that this happened, take him to like a bookstore. Bearing in mind, Bill doesn't read. That's not his, he's a music guy. He can pick up a guitar, and that's where he began doing it in the army, he began doing that. But he's not a reader. But they began to give him books which were sexually strange or not, involving incest, that kind of thing. And one of the books that he was given was Capture in the Rye. Now, some of you guys may know that in The Manchurian Candidate, the film, the Capture in the Rye is a book that is used as a trigger for various, well, in The Manchurian Candidate, it was for assassination.
Yeah.
So you can draw your own conclusions, but this happened several times. And they would give Bill books. They would, force them on him. And he said, now Bill's kind of a blokey bloke. He's a man's man kind of guy. And he likes women and whatever, sex, that as much as the next guy, right? But he's not into the funky, kinky, whatever stuff. As he says, I'm not making a judgment here. This is what he reports. He said, and some of this stuff, he said, was horrible, Jan. It's awful. He said, and even the guys didn't like it. It was perverted. And what's interesting is that one of the books he told me about was called, I think it's My Mother Taught Me. And anyway, so I began doing a bit of research to see if I could find if there was any such book around. And I Googled it, and there it was on Amazon. And I took a screenshot because I was pretty sure it was going to disappear off Amazon too, which it did. It might be there now. So it was there initially as a book in book form, and then it was there, and then secondly as a Kindle. I haven't looked in any recent years to see if it's still there. And I took a screenshot and I showed him that, because we used to speak on Skype as well. And he absolutely freaked out. It made him so poorly because he said, oh my God, it's all real. Now, it's not that he didn't believe his own story. He did, but he'd never had any evidence of it. And so here was I saying, that book, I don't know about this kind of material. And what was very interesting is that the books were produced as erotica by, I think it was a Danish or Norwegian, I can't remember now, it might be Norwegian. Anyway, a Scandi company, publisher, who moved to New York in 1968. Isn't it interesting?
It is weird. You know what? We've been going for about an hour and a half. Can we do a part 2? Can we follow up with this?
Oh, we sure can.
That would be great. That would be great, because this is interesting. Is there still a lot more to go?
Oh, tons.
Oh, yeah. I definitely want to do a part 2. I definitely, because his story is amazing.
I mean, Bill's story, I know it so well enough by heart because I wrote it and I had to interview him. I spent multiple hundreds of hours, I imagine, on phone and Skype. And
it's a very weird story, but it's so intriguing and interesting. It very is. It's very interesting. Do you want to tell everybody the name of the book and where they can get it?
Sure thing. Let me just see if I have it. I got it out. So just so you know what the title the book looks like. So it's called 44, and it does indeed say based on an ex-soldier's true story. And then up here, it's of lifelong encounters involving alien abduction, men in black, serial killer, and the Freemasons. The serial killer bit, I think that's for another time. That's to do with a British serial killer called Fred West. If anybody wants to look that up for the next show and have any questions, then please do. Or if you want,
we'll do that. I'll definitely do that. I'll get my questions in order, and then I'll set it up for the next one. That sounds great. Well, thank you for doing this. This was awesome.
You're welcome.
All right.
It's an amazing, it is, one of the most astonishing stories I've ever heard in my life. And Bill has been completely consistent. And when I started my radio show, which was in about October 2014, I don't do it anymore. But Bill had a heart attack, basically, and he died. And I'm laughing because, I mean, this guy, with all that he's been through, I don't know how the life force can keep the physical still alive. I mean, he really does have a will of iron. So he was resuscitated. And when he came on my show a week later, I introduced him as my recently deceased guest.
That's funny. Wow.
But he doesn't do that anymore. He can't do radio shows because he had another series of strokes earlier this year. And we hadn't spoken for quite a while. And, I know he likes to drink, and I don't have any judgment with that. But, because sometimes the pain can be tough to deal with. And he has a lot of conditions as well now that he's, as an older person, is dealing with.
What's the name of your YouTube channel so I can check out some of your interviews with him?
It's let me just get it up myself. So then it's called youtube.com/user, and it's a MASH project videos. Now, when you get to it, it doesn't come up as the MASH project. It comes up, I couldn't get to change it. Don't ask me why. But it comes up as ETN, the ET Newsroom.
Okay.
And I can tell you about, how that came to be another time.
Yeah, well, I'll check all that out, and I'll get some questions together, and we'll do a part 2. Sound good?
Absolutely fine. And
all
if you, I don't know if you're wrapping up now, that's fine. If you are, that's no problem. But we can, if we come back next time, maybe start with his story as a 9 or 10-year-old in about 1959, 1960, when he goes aboard a spacecraft, when he's invited aboard a spacecraft.
Do you want to tell that real quick before we
I'm happy to. Okay, so here we go. No school for Bill, but by this time he's got a little sister, and his job is to take her to school and pick her up. In the meantime, what's also happened is that Bill has a little brother, and his brother is extremely disabled, not mentally, but physically, has horrific problems. And so his mother spends a lot of time in the hospital. So little Bill is left pretty much to his own devices. His dad works away. So basically there's just Bill and his little sister now and again, and parents on occasion and brother on occasion. So what he does, he's got a bike by this time, which is absolutely amazing because they're so poor, they mainly can't afford just about anything. So he's got his bike and he's taken it to this field, which I've been to, this area, which is amazing. It's now a dog walking place. But before then, in this kind of era, 1959, 60, it was apparently very remote. Excuse me a second. So what he does there, they're growing a crop there, and he thinks, he can't remember if it's wheat or whatever, but what he likes to do is just make a bed in the corn or the crop, lie himself down, and often the animals just come over to him. So you see, for animals to do that, there's, he's got to be a pretty special guy, because animals just don't trust a human like that. So I know that there's another dimension to Bill, something else that is pretty special. Anyway, then he sees these two enormous spheres, and when I say enormous, they're he reckons about 8 foot across each, and they're white. But initially he just sees one, and it's spinning. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. And it's quickly joined by another. And then they zip off. And so he leaps up to see where they've gone and what's happened. Well, what he sees is what we would know as a crop circle that's clearly been made by these two spheres. And then what he sees in the distance is a craft. And he doesn't know it's a craft. He just thinks it's a special, car that somehow got into a field. But he sees this family of 4 walking toward him. And it's clearly, parents and 2 kids. And as they come up to him, They anxiously ask if he's seen any reptilians. How about that?
Wow.
I know. Can you believe it? Well, look, Bill's vocabulary is extremely limited, but what he does know is that this location, he knows it like the back of his hand. He goes here every day. He's been going there for years. So he knows that if there was anything unusual, he'd know about it. So, and he hasn't seen any reptiles, or he doesn't know what a reptilian is. So he just says, no, I don't think so. So he says with that, they kind of relax. And now the look of these people is what we would call the Nordics, or ascribe the Nordic look to. And so, oh, sorry, got a real tickle. And so then they ask him if he would like to help the earth. And he says, oh, yes, of course. What would you like me to do? And they said, you will know when the time is right. And so then they said, now, would you like to go for a ride with us? Oh, well, Bill he's an adventure boy, that's for sure. So he follows them into the craft. And this craft, he said, look, it looks, to give you an idea of the look of it, it's a bit triangular. It isn't inside, but it looks triangular because he referenced a vehicle that was known for doing land speed records called Bluebird, which had been used by a guy called Donald Campbell in the UK back in the day. And that's what it looked like to him. So he's in the ship and the parents leave him with the kids. And the kids have got a couple of spheres and they are playing with them, but they're playing with them using their mind. And they say to Bill, go on, you try. And he said, no, I can't do that. And they said, no, you can. You use your mind. And anyway, so he thought he'd have a go, and he did. And this little ball or sphere started moving. I mean, in years, long gone by, and I asked him about that, he says, well, I'm not sure they didn't do it for me because, look, I can't do it now. So that's an interesting point. But anyway, so then one of the parents comes to get him. And in the book, you'll see it's a kind of a big room. It looks circular, and there's a circular kind of porthole. And as he's looking through the porthole, or as he can see through the porthole, he notices what he now knows is Earth moving away at a rapid speed. So wow. He's obviously flying, and he was really excited. He thought it was great. And then I don't know if it's actually in the middle of this part of the craft or a little bit further, but anyway, there is a plinth, and it's like I don't know, maybe 5 foot. And then there's a kind of a glass cloche on top. So a see-through domed piece. And underneath it is like a child's spinning top toy. I don't know if you know what I mean, but in England, you used to get those toys. They look like a spacecraft, actually, with a little bob at the top, and you press it down and it spins like mad.
Yeah.
And the apparently dad, let's call him Dad Nordic, was explaining to him about propulsion, or perhaps not as we know it, but about what was happening. Bill says, I don't really remember any of that. He said, what I did notice that as this piece under this glass cloche began to spin so fast that it went invisible, the craft really moved at a huge speed, rapid speed. So he was seeing all of this, experiencing all of this. And then Mum, let's call her, looked at Dad anxiously and said, I think, we have to take him back. And so they began their descent back to Earth.
That's an amazing story. Wow.
Yeah. And when they got back, he was now thinking, oh my gosh, it's a little bit late. I've got to go get my sister. So he's not thought anything different of this. He thought this was perfectly normal. That's what I love about Bill. He's just can accept some of these things, when he was a kid, some really strange things happened to him, but this was incredible. So then he said to them, will I see you again? And they said, yeah, look to the clouds. He never has seen them again, that he's aware of, that is. And he doesn't know what that was about helping the earth, unless it's getting his story out and letting, the rest of humanity know that there are people who are helping with the planet. I don't know quite how that fits in. But
I think it is getting his story out. And I think maybe he is maybe of the Nordic race. Maybe they knew that, like picking him up that day. You know what I mean? That's what I would draw from that. Like, I think he's definitely a starseed.
Well, I don't see how he can have his experiences and not be, because they've been throughout his life. I mean, they don't happen particularly much now, but they certainly did. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that he rang me in an absolute thing saying, "Oh my God, I'm passing by," and it was the area that he'd had his first experiences in when he saw this massive cross in the sky, like a Christian cross hanging in the sky, which then turned into a ship. I mean, wow. I've got an audio of him talking about it, but it's really amazing, because then he just runs off, and he realizes that he doesn't see his bike anywhere, just to finish this story, and he looks everywhere for it, and then he thinks, "Oh my God, I'm just going to have to run to get my sister, and never mind the bike." But something makes him turn around, and he's turned around, and there's the Nordics with his bike. Now I don't know. Oh
wow!
I don't know whether they were going to take it so they could, I don't know, explore using it or whatever. But anyway, they obviously picked up his anxiety and they gave him the bike back. I mean, he just thought it had been lost and they found it or something. And then off they went, and off he went to get his sister. And that is that story of him being invited to go on the ship, with a little cough or two and a splutter from me.
Well, this was amazing. Like I said, we'll have to do a part 2. If you have more Bill stories, I'd love to hear them. But like I said, thank you for coming on. This was truly amazing.
Well, I'm glad there's some amazing stuff, happening in the world, and amazing stories too, and more that I'm working on as well.
And thank you for doing what you do, because I'm a big ufology, I've never had a paranormal experience myself, but I hope to someday. And
watch out for that one then.
I look up to the sky all the time. So thank you again for coming on. Have a good night.